Hey everybody, my name is Tessa. I'm a licensed midwife, certified professional midwife in the state of California. So today's video is about how I studied for and passed the NARM exam. The NARM exam is the board exam that certified professional midwives have to take at the end of their formal midwifery schooling and clinical training. So for me, I didn't get like a particularly high score. I didn't get a particularly low score. It was pretty average. I scored an 83 on the NARM, and I'm not necessarily like a gunner test taker. Like, I get a little nervous when I take tests, but at the same time, I know that like when I'm taking a test, I'm aiming to pass the test. And of course, I would love a super high score. Everybody would love a super high score on a test. But for me, it's more about like retaining the information. So when I was studying for the NARM, I was studying to pass the test, but I was also studying to really cement and solidify a lot of the concepts and a lot of the information and learning that had come up over the 4 years that I had been in midwifery school, because I was about to enter practice as a CPM and I wanted to make sure I was really solid on all of these concepts. So in this video, I'll go over what I did to prepare, what was helpful, what didn't help, and the best advice that I got from other midwives who had taken the NARM recently and who were mentoring me. So let's get into it. So the first thing that I found was really helpful was the Heart and Hands flashcard bank on Quizlet. There's about 3,000 questions on these flashcards, and I would just do them every single day. Like I think I would do like 300 a day. And I gave myself a solid 3 weeks to prep for the NARM, where I did nothing but study and sleep and eat. And occasionally I'd go outside and stretch, but I just went into a study cave for about 3 weeks. To all of my friends and family who supported me through that, thank you. You are the OGs. So yes, the Heart and Hands flashcards were extremely helpful. And then I made my own study guide with the candidate information booklet. Many of you may be wondering, like, what are the questions on the NARM like? And while I can't disclose any of that information because they actually have you sign a non-disclosure before you take the exam, I can tell you this. There are different forms of the NARM. I took Form R, and the questions on my exam were very similar to the questions on the Gabler practice tests, both the 300 and the 600. I also downloaded the Luella George study guide and practice test, and I found that very helpful. And the Mercy in Action practice test was also very helpful. However, I would say that most of the questions were pretty similar to the Gabler practice tests. They're designed to confuse you, so make sure you're reading them thoroughly before you answer. Give yourself enough time to answer, and don't be too hard on yourself. So just jumping back to what I did and what I found really helpful. The Heart and Hands question bank, I read Heart and Hands cover to cover. Heart and Hands I find is like not as comprehensive as I wished it would be, but it is exceptionally good prep for the NARM because Elizabeth Davis was one of the founding members of the whole thing. So read Heart and Hands cover to cover and do the Heart and Hands Quizlet flashcards and question banks. And that, I think, number one, like overall, just prepared me for like the kind of information that I would need to have, because it is so broad. You just don't know what's going to be on your form. I got a form that had like, thank God I did a preceptorship with Dr. Fishbein, because it had so many questions that I just would not have known how to answer had I not had the exposure to certain things in my preceptorship. So that's actually worth noting too. The number one thing that will prepare you is your midwifery degree. Make sure you do all your assignments in midwifery school, and the areas that you feel weakest, dive into those the deepest. Trust me. Also, clinical preceptorship. A super thorough clinical preceptorship is going to prepare you to take the NARM, and it's going to prepare you for safe practice. And this is something that a lot of midwifery students don't want to hear, because it is so hard to come through midwifery school, and it is so hard to be a student in midwifery school and to feel like you're just never gonna make it. But I tell you what, when you graduate and you pass the NARM and you're in practice, you're gonna wish that you had a longer preceptorship if you're anything like me. So a super thorough clinical preceptorship that exposes you to everything. I know some midwives that sailed through preceptorship and they basically, they were like, what are you talking about? I've never seen that complication. And then I know some other midwives who sailed through preceptorship and they had seen almost every complication. So it's kind of luck of the draw. Everybody's experience is different. We're all trained in the same skills. However, I would say that if there's an area where you feel a little shaky, really do a deep dive into that and ensure that you are knowledgeable and prepared and ask as many questions as you possibly can. I mean, I cannot stress that enough. If you don't know something, somebody else does. The internet is a wealth of information. So please, don't be shy. There's no such thing as a stupid question. We are all still learning. I am still learning. I hope I never learn it all. I never want to be the smartest person in the room, ever. So jumping back into it, Heart and Hands flashcards. Read Heart and Hands cover to cover. Take practice tests daily, if you're like me. If you're not like me, take them weekly. And score yourself and pay attention to the areas that you score poorly on. And then reinforce the knowledge there. Also, make a study guide with the candidate information booklet. You can pay attention to the way that they have a couple practice test questions in there actually, so you can look at that to see kind of how they're worded. But also know that the NARM has more than one right answer. So the test is designed to help you pass. So just take a deep breath and remember that. But when you're making a study guide with the CIB, go through like cover to cover with all of the skills and all of the things that you're supposed to know when you make your study guide. So just like copy and paste that into a document and then go through line by line and just information dump. This is how I did this. I information dumped everything I knew about that thing or subject or what. So, for instance, take like hemoglobin and hematocrit and like lab values, interpreting lab values, etc. So I would dump like, what's hemoglobin, what's hematocrit? And then I would dump like, what are the normal values for pregnancy? What are the abnormal values for pregnancy? What indicates blood volume expansion? What indicates hemolytic anemia? What indicates microcytic anemia? What indicates macrocytic anemia? Like all of these things I would go through and then I would be like, what's macrocytic anemia? How do you treat it? Or not, I guess midwives aren't allowed to treat. How do you support your client if she's presenting with this kind of a lab value? How would you counsel her on nutrition? How would you counsel her and give her education? What vitamin deficiencies, what this, what that. And you just go and you info dump as much as you possibly can, the whole CIB. And that was my first pass. So I think when I made my study guide with my CIB, I think I did like 6 passes in 3 weeks. And it was just so helpful. It was so helpful, not only for NARM prep, but it prepared me for practice. And I still refer back to that study guide in practice now. And I'm a year out post-licensure. So those are the things that I would say were most helpful for me in preparing for the NARM. Also, just taking a test. Whenever I took a practice test, I would simulate test conditions. And one little psychological hack that I did was I would wear the same outfit that I had studied in to take the test. And that actually I did the same day I took the NARM. I wore the outfit that I studied the most in to the test. And I don't know if it actually did anything, but I like to think that it did. And it was just kind of like reassuring. And then other than that, what helped me the most, I would say, was probably this piece of advice that I got from every midwife that I'd spoke to who had taken the NARM recently or who had taken the NARM in general. They all said, answer as if you were every single CPM in the United States. So keep in mind, this test was written for all certified professional midwives across the US. Don't answer like a midwife would in your state based on your scope and your laws, which you are expected to know inside and out. However, when it comes to questions on the NARM, you're going to answer like every single CPM across the United States would. So for instance, if you get a question and you're like, that could be different based on the state that you're in. Think about what 90% of CPMs would do. And then remember that there's a rightist answer and a somewhat right answer, and then 2 wrong answers. I hope that helps. What I didn't find helpful was focusing on the areas that I also knew a lot about. I thought, I didn't actually really learn to study efficiently until I was probably in my 2nd year of midwifery school, I would say. I thought that I had to know all of the information, and I didn't know anything about forgetting curves. And that's actually really something that I should mention with things I found helpful. We all have a forgetting curve. So constantly doing reviews and doing passes over information that you've gone over is going to help you. So I would do flashcards constantly. I mean, I did that 3,000 question flashcard question bank for the whole 3-week period. Like if I wasn't doing a pass over my study guide that I had made with the CIB, if I wasn't taking a practice test, if I wasn't reading Heart and Hands, I would do flashcard questions. I would do them before I went to sleep. I would do them right when I woke up. And I actually started dreaming about flashcards. But that's no different than the stress dreams I have about people calling me in labor. So, great. Yeah, so that is definitely very important. When you review things consistently, they stick better in your mind and you remember them. The things that I didn't really find that helpful, I didn't find Varney's very helpful. Though it's great information, I thought that if I just really focused on using resources that I felt were stickier for me, that was great. I listened to a ton of podcasts while I was studying. I listened to a lot of YouTube videos. I would turn the speed up so that I could listen to them and I could be taking notes or writing things down, writing questions down. I used a lot of the Cornell note-taking strategies where you write a question, then you answer it. And that helped me tremendously. But I didn't find it very helpful to focus on the information that I thought I needed to know. So while I was going through the CIB, my first pass, and I was info dumping, I started really noticing there were areas that were making me feel kind of slow and I was focusing a little bit too much on. And I felt like I needed to go really deep into everything, but I didn't. It turns out when you know something, you know something. You can always learn more about it, but for the purposes of this exam, I didn't need to get so wrapped around the axle, for instance, about vitamin D. So yeah, other things I didn't find too helpful were, while I actually did buy other people's study guides, I mostly bought them to see the layout of the study guide because I didn't feel super confident making my own study guide. I felt really overwhelmed by the concept of it, but I knew it was something that I wanted to do. So I bought 2 study guides from other students who had taken the NARM and used the CIB to make their study guides. And then I sort of based my study guide off of their outlines. But I didn't find reading other people's study guides too helpful. It just didn't really help me that much because it was their brain putting the information down, not really my brain putting the information down. And then other things that I didn't really find that helpful, let's see. There are a ton of Quizlet NARM flashcards. Using some of them, I felt again, it was their brain, not my brain. And some of the flashcards are actually incorrect. So that is something to be aware of. But the flashcards for Heart and Hands, the question banks, there's Heart and Hands 1 and Heart and Hands 2. I will link them down below, along with the link to Jen Gabler's practice test. So I'll actually link her email. You can contact her directly and buy that practice test, which I found extremely helpful. And then the Mercy and Action practice tests as well. But yeah, just be aware that some of the NARM flashcards are incorrect. You'll know when you find a really good deck. There are some really good flashcard decks. I unfortunately didn't make my own. I found it more helpful to just like use the Heart and Hands flashcards that were readily available. And then I also didn't necessarily find it that helpful to be like running questions by my preceptors in that 3-week period. I found it much more effective to just like dive deep on the internet, revisit all of my study materials from school, and find the answers myself, because I did ask some questions, but I felt like my preceptors weren't able to give me like a really in-depth exam specific response, if that makes sense. Excuse me. And yeah, so then the day of my test, I just sort of showed up and I took my test, and then I got my result right as I was walking out of my test. So that was like super, super relieving. But yeah, I think that covers it. What I did to prepare, what I found helpful, what I didn't find helpful, and then that advice, that piece of advice I got from all the midwives who had taken the NARM. Just what would 90% of the certified professional midwives in the US do? When in doubt, ask yourself that question. Okay, I hope this helps. Happy test taking. Thanks for watching.